More than 5,000 years ago, entire communities can move stones weighing several tons without a single wagon, tire, or axle to help them. Imagine standing beside one of those loads now. The ground is uneven beneath your feet. Rope fibers bite into your palms. Somewhere nearby, people grunt in rhythm as a timber sledge scrapes slowly across packed earth, making a sound rather like an enormous cupboard being dragged through the world's least cooperative kitchen. There is no wheel beneath it. For most of human existence, there never has been. You live in a world where everything heavy must be carried, dragged, floated, or persuaded along by animals and human muscle. A sack of grain is a burden. A stone block is a project. A fallen tree is practically a committee meeting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, you can share where in the world you're listening from, along with your local time. Now, dim the lights and step into a landscape where the wheel does not yet exist. The first thing you notice is how physical this world feels. Your feet press into damp soil, dry grass brushes your ankles, smoke from a cooking fire hangs low in the evening air, mixed with the smell of crushed herbs, animal hide, and freshly cut wood. Somewhere beyond the settlement, an axe strikes a tree with a slow, patient rhythm. People around you are not waiting helplessly for some brilliant inventor to arrive. They already know how to move things. Human beings have been carrying burdens for hundreds of thousands of years. You lift baskets, you sling bags across your shoulders, you balance jars against your hip, you strap bundles to your back. If the load is small enough, the most convenient transportation device is simply another person. This solution is wonderfully reliable, right up until somebody decides that a stone the size of a dining table absolutely must be moved over there. Then the problem changes. A heavy object sitting on the ground resists movement because its underside presses against the surface beneath it. When you pull it, rough surfaces catch against one another. Today you call this friction, but you do not need the word to understand the experience. Your shoulders explain it perfectly. Pull a heavy log across dry earth and you feel resistance through the rope. Pull the same log across smooth wet clay and it moves more easily. Place branches underneath it and something else happens. Suddenly the load does not scrape directly against the soil. People notice such differences. They notice everything that saves effort. Long before wheeled vehicles appear, humans become remarkably skilled at dragging enormous loads on sledges. A sledge is almost insultingly simple. It has no spinning parts and no elegant mechanism. At its most basic, it is a platform or pair of runners beneath a load. Yet simple does not mean foolish. A well-made sledge spreads weight, prevents awkward objects from digging deeply into soft ground, and gives ropes a secure structure to pull against. On snow, wet earth, grass, or prepared tracks, it can work surprisingly well. Records from much later ancient societies confirm just how effective dragging can be. Egyptian scenes show large objects transported on sledges while workers pull together, and liquid is apparently poured in front of the runners to help the load move across the surface. The principle is older than those images. You do not need mathematics to discover that changing the ground changes the effort. Picture a group preparing a route. People clear stones from the path. They flatten bumps, they remove roots, they may lay vegetation, wooden pieces, or other material beneath a burden. If a slope is involved, ropes control the load from several directions. The transportation system is not one invention. It is cooperation. Someone chooses the route. Someone prepares the surface. Someone makes rope. Someone repairs the sledge. Someone gives the pulling rhythm. Someone almost certainly complains that everyone else is pulling incorrectly. Human civilization advances. Human workplace dynamics remain reassuringly familiar. Now your attention shifts toward timber. A straight tree trunk has a useful property. It is round enough to roll. If you place a heavy object on top of several logs, the load can move as the logs rotate beneath it. Once a roller comes out behind the object, someone carries it around to the front and places it down again, slowly, laboriously. The burden creeps forward. This idea feels temptingly close to the wheel, but it is not the wheel. That distinction matters. A roller moves independently beneath a load. It does not stay attached to the vehicle. It must be repositioned again and again on a smooth, prepared surface. This can be useful on broken ground, steep paths, mud, or thick vegetation. It becomes awkward very quickly. You can almost hear the frustration. A log slips sideways. Another sinks into the soil. Someone's foot is nearly trapped. The load tilts. Everyone stops. The supervisor, assuming prehistoric supervisors exist in recognizable form, looks deeply disappointed despite having contributed very little physical effort. Oddly enough, one of the great misunderstandings about early transport comes from how obvious log rollers seem to you today. Modern illustrations often show ancient people casually rolling giant stones along neat rows of perfectly cylindrical tree trunks, as though nature supplies matching wooden rollers from a convenient prehistoric hardware shop. Real trees are not so cooperative. They taper, they bend. Their bark creates uneven surfaces. Knots protrude. Different trunks have different diameters. A heavy load may crush soft timber or force rollers into the ground. The method works under the right conditions, but it demands preparation, and preparation is becoming one of the hidden themes of early technology. You begin to realize that moving heavy things is rarely about a single clever object. It is about reshaping an entire situation until movement becomes possible. You make a path, you choose the season. Frozen ground may help in cold regions. Wet sand may behave differently from dry sand. River transport may be easier than dragging something across hills. A heavy object that is almost impossible to move inland can become manageable when placed on a raft. Water, in fact, is one of humanity's greatest early transportation tools. Logs float, bundles float. Boats carry weight without requiring anyone to invent a wheel at all. If your settlement lies near a river, the easiest answer to a transportation problem may not be to improve movement across land. It may be to avoid land whenever possible. This is one reason technology never develops according to a neat universal ladder. You do not begin with carrying, graduate to sledges, discover rollers, and inevitably receive a wheel as though completing levels in a game. Different communities face different landscapes. A marsh demands one solution, a forest suggests another. A wide river offers possibilities that a rocky plateau does not. A snowy winter changes everything again. Scholars bicker over how important rollers really are in the story that eventually leads to wheeled transport. Some see rolling logs as a natural conceptual step toward understanding rotational movement. Others warn that the apparent progression may seem more obvious to modern observers than it actually is. That uncertainty is important. You already know what a wheel looks like. The people living here do not. It is extremely difficult to forget an invention once you have grown up surrounded by it. Round objects seem destined to rotate. Wheels appear so elementary that you might imagine someone merely slices a disc from a log, pokes a hole through the middle, and congratulates themselves. But the real problem is not discovering that round things roll. Children can watch stones tumble downhill. People see logs rotate, seeds roll, bones roll, pebbles scatter underfoot. The puzzle is learning how to turn rotation into controlled transportation. For now, that puzzle remains unresolved. Instead, you stand among people who are becoming masters of older methods. Listen to the ropes stretch. Hear wooden runners grinding across soil. Feel the vibration beneath your feet as a heavy load moves a few inches, then stops, then moves again. There is patience in this work, because there has to be. A large community project may require dozens or hundreds of people coordinating their effort. Moving building material can become a social achievement as much as a technical one. Leadership, food supplies, labour organisation, and shared purpose matter alongside ropes and timber. A curious footnote appears whenever archaeologists study monumental construction. Enormous objects do not always require advanced machinery. Experiments repeatedly demonstrate that surprisingly heavy loads can be moved using combinations of leverage, dragging, prepared surfaces, ropes, and coordinated human labour. Your ancestors are not missing intelligence. They're using different tools. That distinction matters because the absence of wheels does not mean the absence of engineering. Look around the settlement again. Woodworkers understand grain and splitting. Rope makers understand tension. Builders understand balance. Hunters understand leverage. Farmers understand soil. Boat builders understand buoyancy. People who have never seen a wagon may nevertheless possess detailed practical knowledge accumulated across generations. The knowledge lives in hands as much as in words. You learn which wood bends without snapping. You learn how thick a rope must be before you trust your life to it. You learn where to stand when a load begins slipping downhill. You learn that 12 people pulling at random are less useful than 8 people pulling together. And gradually, the challenge of transport becomes sharper. Communities are settling more permanently in many regions. Farming encourages people to store grain, timber, pottery, stone, and other heavy materials. Houses grow more substantial. Fields may lie some distance from settlements. Animals, crops, building materials, and goods all need to travel. The more possessions you have, the more inconvenient it becomes to carry your world on your back. A nomadic group can design life around portability. A farming village cannot always do the same. There are grinding stones to move, harvest to transport, timber to haul, clay to bring home, food stores to relocate, perhaps stone for walls, monuments, or communal structures must travel farther than anyone would prefer. Every journey quietly asks the same question. Can this be easier? You pull the sledge. The rope tightens. The runners scrape forward. Someone places another piece of timber beneath the load. Nothing magical happens. There is no sudden flash of inspiration. No prehistoric inventor leaping upright and shouting that circles are the future. Instead, there is repetition, weight, resistance, observation, adjustment, another attempt, and somewhere inside that endless human habit of making difficult work slightly less difficult. One of history's most famous mechanical problems is taking shape. The burden must move. The ground refuses to cooperate. Your muscles are tired, and the world is still waiting for a better answer. Your hands are no longer gripping rope. They're wet with clay. You sit close to the ground beside a low working surface surrounded by bowls, jars, lumps of earth, and the faint mineral smell of damp soil. A fire crackles somewhere beyond the workspace. Someone nearby kneads clay with both palms, pressing air from it in slow, practiced motions. Another person smooths the rim of a vessel with a wet fingertip. Nothing here resembles a cart. And yet rotation has entered the room. At first, pottery does not require a spinning wheel. You can shape a vessel by hand, coil by coil, pressing strips of clay together and smoothing them into walls. You can pinch a small bowl from a single lump. You can paddle and beat the surface. You can turn the pot yourself as you work. The vessel rotates because your hands move it. That seems ordinary. But then comes a subtle improvement. Instead of lifting the pot again and again, you place it on a flat support that can turn. Perhaps it is a simple mat, perhaps a board, perhaps a stone disc resting loosely enough to rotate. You keep your hands steady while the clay moves beneath them. It is a small change, but the sensation is completely different. Your fingers remain near one point while the entire vessel passes through them. The clay seems almost to cooperate. A rotating platform gives you symmetry more easily. The wall can become smoother, the rim can become more even. Your hands learn the rhythm of controlled circular movement. Round, pause, round again. There is no road beneath this object. There is no axle carrying a load. But there is rotation being deliberately managed. That matters. Archaeological evidence shows that potters in parts of ancient Southwest Asia use forms of turntables or rotating supports long before the fast potter's wheel becomes common. These devices are sometimes called tournette systems, slow wheels, or rotating mats, depending on how they are built and how freely they spin. The labels sound rather modern for such humble equipment. The principle is simple. You reduce the need to walk around the pot. Instead, the pot comes around to you. That is a wonderfully human form of efficiency. Why move your entire body when you can make the workpiece perform the journey? Your knees appreciate this development immediately. You press your thumb against the clay and give the platform another turn. The surface slides beneath your fingers. You begin to understand rotation not merely as something that happens when an object rolls away, but as something useful when it stays in one place. This is a different mental world. A rolling log escapes across the ground. A rotating pottery platform remains controlled. It spins around a centre. That centre becomes important. With enough practice, you learn that a platform rotating unevenly makes poor pottery. If the centre wobbles, the vessel wobbles. If the support tilts, your hands must constantly compensate. So the craft encourages attention to balance. You notice circularity. You notice central positioning. You notice what happens when a flat object turns around one point. A council decree does not survive to explain the moment, of course, and nobody scratches a note into wet clay saying, "Today we have discovered rotational mechanics." Technology rarely introduces itself so politely. It hides inside routine. A potter wants a better bowl, a carpenter wants a flatter board, a household wants containers made a little faster. Skills accumulate quietly. Records preserved through archaeology confirm that pottery production grows increasingly specialized in several early urban and village societies. As communities become larger, demand rises for storage jars, cooking vessels, drinking cups, ritual containers, and transport pots. Clay is everywhere. So are jobs for the people who know how to shape it. Picture the workshop growing busier. Finished vessels line a wall. Some are squat and thick. Others have narrow necks. A few lean slightly to one side. Perhaps the work of an apprentice who insists they are meant to look like that. The more pots you produce, the more useful rotation becomes. A slowly turning platform saves repositioning. A faster one changes the craft further. If the surface spins with sufficient speed and steadiness, you can use centrifugal motion and constant hand pressure to shape clay rapidly and symmetrically. This is the world of the potter's wheel. The exact sequence by which slow rotating platforms develop into faster potter's wheels is complicated, and local traditions differ. What matters is that craftspeople learn to construct devices designed specifically for repeated circular motion. The mechanism may include a rotating disc, supported around a central point. In later forms, it can become a heavier wheel that stores momentum. You give it a push, it keeps turning. Your hands settle on the clay. The lump rises, the walls narrow. The vessel takes form with an elegance that can look almost magical if you have never done it yourself. If you have done it yourself, you know the magic includes a fair amount of mud on your clothes. One scandalous aside from the history of pottery is that archaeologists sometimes identify individual potters through tiny habits left behind in clay. Finger marks, shaping choices, decorative styles, and recurring imperfections can hint at particular workshops or even individual hands. The potter disappears, the fingerprints remain. There is something intimate about that. You place your fingertips against a vessel made thousands of years ago, and the surface may preserve the movement of someone else's fingers beneath yours. Rotation preserves rhythm. The shape of the pot records repeated turning. This craft is becoming one of the earliest places where circular motion is not accidental. It is engineered. You want the platform to turn freely enough to save effort, but not so freely that it spins beyond control. You want it stable. You want it centered. You want the working surface flat. You want the clay to remain positioned while the support moves beneath it. These sound like modest demands, yet they are mechanically sophisticated. A circular object must interact with a fixed center. Friction must be reduced in one place and maintained in another. The whole arrangement must support weight. If the base drags too much, rotation is exhausting. If it slips too easily, control becomes difficult. Your body becomes the testing instrument. You feel resistance through your palm. You hear scraping beneath the disc. You adjust. Perhaps a little sand helps. Perhaps smoother stone helps. Perhaps a different wooden support works better. Ancient workshops are laboratories without white coats. Instead, there are aprons of hide, dusty floors, chipped tools, and people who learn by repeating the same motion until failure becomes informative. Scholars still argue whether pottery technology directly inspires wheeled transport. The possibility is attractive. A rotating disc around a central point looks, to modern eyes, suspiciously close to a wheel. Yet resemblance does not prove dissent. A potter's turntable solves one problem. A vehicle wheel solves another. One spins horizontally while supporting a vessel. The other usually turns vertically while supporting a moving load. The forces are different. The construction is different. The purpose is different. Some researchers therefore caution against imagining a neat line from pottery wheel to cartwheel. Others suggest that familiarity with the rotational devices may make the mechanical idea easier to recognize and reproduce. No agreement has been reached on whether one technology meaningfully helps generate the other, and that uncertainty is useful. It reminds you that invention does not always move in a straight line. People can understand circles perfectly well without building wagons. They can build wagons without borrowing ideas from pottery. They can also borrow, adapt, misunderstand, improve, and recombine technologies in ways that leave almost no trace. Human creativity is messy. Archaeology has to reconstruct the mess from fragments: a broken ceramic base, a worn stone surface, a groove, a wooden piece preserved in unusually wet ground, a pattern of use. Tiny clues carry enormous arguments. You sit again beside the clay. The platform turns beneath your hands. A narrow jar rises slowly from the lump. Your palms are steady now. One hand supports the outside. The other shapes the inner wall. The rotation keeps bringing fresh clay beneath your fingers. This changes more than speed. It changes what kinds of objects are easy to make. Greater regularity becomes possible. Walls can become thinner. Shapes can become more standardized. Production can accelerate. In growing settlements, this matters economically. If households need many vessels, a specialist who produces them efficiently becomes valuable. Craft specialization can deepen. People trade food or other goods for pottery. Workshops develop recognizable styles. Forms become associated with communities and regions. A technology that begins as a convenience can influence trade, storage, cooking, status, and ritual. The wheel beneath the pot does not travel anywhere, yet its consequences travel widely. You hear a soft scrape as the platform slows. A hand gives it another push. The clay circles again. The process teaches patience. Too much pressure, and the vessel collapses. Too little and the wall remains thick. If the clay is too wet, it slumps. If it is too dry, it cracks. If the rotation is uneven, every small mistake repeats around the entire circumference. That is the cruel efficiency of circular motion, A floor can become beautifully symmetrical. You smile at the thought. The apprentice beside you has produced a bowl with a rim that rises and falls like a gentle wave. Technically, it is consistent. Nobody has the heart to call it straight. Over time, the very act of watching a round platform turn around a centre becomes familiar. Children see it. Craft workers see it. Traders see finished products coming from it. Carpenters may help construct it. Stoneworkers may shape the base. The knowledge is not locked inside one person's mind. It lives across a community. Someone understands clay. Someone understands wood. Someone understands how surfaces rub. Someone understands how to keep a disc balanced. Someone understands how to make a heavy rotating object continue moving once it has been pushed. These are pieces of mechanical intuition, not a blueprint, not a sudden revelation. Pieces. For a moment, your ears focus on the repetitive sound beneath the platform. Scrape, turn, scrape, turn. The rhythm is soothing. The workshop settles into its evening routine. Finished vessels gather in rows. The smell of wet clay mingles with smoke from the firing area. Your fingertips are coated in fine brown slip. The rotating surface gradually slows beneath the final pot. What you're watching is a quiet transformation in human thought. Rotation is no longer merely something observed in nature. It becomes something built, controlled, repeated, useful. The circle is still staying in place, but human hands have learned how to make it work. A tree trunk rolls downhill whether anyone understands mechanics or not. That is the irritatingly simple clue sitting in plain sight. You stand on a patch of hard ground where several freshly cut trunks lie beside a large wooden platform. The air smells of sap and bark. Chips of pale wood cling to your sandals. A beetle disappears beneath one log. Wisely avoiding whatever ambitious experiment the humans nearby are planning. The load is heavy. The trunks are round enough. So you place several beneath the platform and push. For a moment, almost nothing happens. Then the first roller turns, the second follows. The platform moves, not far, perhaps, but enough to make everyone notice. The sensation is different from dragging. Instead of fighting continuously against a broad surface rubbing along the ground, you feel the load shift as the cylinders rotate underneath it. Push, roll, stop. Move a rear log to the front. Push again. There is a certain elegance to it. There is also a great deal of inconvenience. The rollers wander sideways. One encounters a stone and stops. Another sinks slightly into softer earth. Someone has to crouch near the moving load to reposition timber, which is precisely where you would prefer not to place your fingers. The technique is useful, but it is not yet a vehicle. That distinction hides one of the largest conceptual leaps in the entire story of wheeled transport. A roller works because the whole cylinder travels beneath the load. The timber rotates, touches the ground, passes under the platform, and eventually emerges from the other side. A wheel behaves differently. A wheel must remain permanently connected to the vehicle. It must rotate without simply escaping from underneath it. That sounds obvious to you because you have spent your life surrounded by bicycles, cars, suitcases, office chairs, shopping carts, and those one supermarket trolleys that somehow insist on turning left. To an ancient craftsperson, however, the problem is stranger. How do you make the useful rolling part stay with the load? Imagine trying to solve it without ever having seen the answer. You take a round section of timber. You place it beneath a platform. It rolls away. You attach it firmly to the platform. Now it cannot roll at all. Excellent. You have invented a very heavy decoration. The trick is to connect two things while still allowing movement between them. This is not merely about making something circular. It is about creating controlled independence. The moving part must be attached. The attachment must not prevent rotation. The wheel must support weight. The centre must remain stable. The contact surfaces must survive repeated rubbing. And all of this must be achieved with wood, stone tools, simple drills, wedges, pegs, fibres, perhaps some grease, and a great deal of patience. That is where the humble roller becomes less of an answer and more of a teacher. You watch one rotating trunk carefully. Its outer surface moves quickly over the ground, but there is a point near its centre that moves differently. If you could somehow hold that central line while allowing the outside to rotate, the roller would no longer need to escape from beneath the load. The idea is easy to describe once someone has already solved it. Getting there is another matter. Ancient craftspeople understand rotating objects in many practical settings. Spindles turn fibres into thread. Drills rotate against wood, bone, and stone. Circular motions appear in grinding and craft production. People are familiar with twisting, spinning, boring, winding, and turning. What they do not automatically possess is the complete architecture of a wheeled vehicle. One clever observation is not enough. You need several ideas to meet: round components, a stable central axis, a method of attachment, a load-bearing frame, a surface smooth enough to permit rotation, a structure strong enough not to collapse. Technology often develops this way, not as one miraculous thought, but as several ordinary skills suddenly becoming useful together. Your fingers trace the bark of a log. Its shape creates another problem. Natural tree trunks are rarely perfect cylinders. One end may be wider than the other. The trunk bends. Knots protrude. Bark catches against the load. A roller that is slightly tapered does not travel straight. It drifts. If you place several different trunks beneath one platform, each may try to guide the load in its own preferred direction. The result is less transportation and more negotiation. So you begin modifying the timber. Branches are removed. Bark may be stripped. High spots are cut away. You search for straighter pieces. The better the roller, the easier the movement. A curious footnote appears in experiments with reconstructed ancient transport. Even small differences in roller diameter can make a heavy platform twist or shift unexpectedly. The idea may be elementary, but successful execution demands tension. This encourages another thought. Perhaps the roller does not need to remain one long cylinder. Suppose only its outer ends contact the ground. Imagine narrowing the middle. Now the object begins to resemble a single axle, with thicker rolling ends. It still rotates as one piece. The entire assembly turns beneath the platform. This arrangement can work, but it creates a new difficulty. If the axle rotates inside some kind of support, the contact points must bear enormous pressure. Wood rubs against wood. Heat and wear increase. The fitting cannot be too tight. Neither can it be too loose. You crouch beside the joint and hear the creak. There is your problem speaking, affirmed. Creaking is often engineering, announcing that it would like attention. You smear animal fat or another lubricant onto the rubbing surface. The sound softens. The turning improves. Ancient people do not need a formal theory of friction to discover lubrication. Anyone who has worked with moving wooden parts can learn very quickly that certain substances make surfaces slide more easily. Records confirm that lubricants are used in many ancient mechanical contexts, though exactly what the earliest vehicle makers apply can be difficult to determine. Much of the machinery is wood. Wood has a terrible habit from the archaeologist's perspective. It disappears, it rots, it burns, it gets reused, it becomes food for fungi and insects. A stone tool may survive for thousands of years while the wooden machine it helped create vanishes almost completely. That means some of the earliest experiments in rolling transport could leave little direct evidence. You're trying to reconstruct a technological conversation in which most of the sentences have been erased. Tracks sometimes survive. Ruts can survive. Models can survive. Images can survive. Wood occasionally survives in waterlogged environments where oxygen is limited, but failed prototypes rarely announce themselves. No one preserves an unsuccessful wooden contraption for future researchers. They break it apart. They burn it. They turn it into something else. One scandalous aside, if prehistoric engineering can be allowed a little scandal, is that the first person to attempt a wheeled platform may have produced something spectacularly useless. Perhaps it leaned. Perhaps the wheels jammed. Perhaps the axle snapped. Perhaps the whole thing travelled 3 meters and buried itself in mud. Innovation is usually presented in museums after all embarrassing versions have been removed from the story. Real invention is probably much messier. You test another arrangement. 2 rollers sit beneath a platform. Instead of repeatedly transferring them from the rear to the front, you try to keep them captured under the frame. Wooden guides prevent them from escaping sideways. Now the cylinders can turn while remaining approximately beneath the load. That seems promising, yet steering is dreadful. If the 2 rollers are rigid and long, both sides must rotate together. On a turn, the outside edge needs to travel farther than the inside edge. Something must slip. The vehicle resists. Even travelling straight creates problems if the ground is uneven. Scholars bicker over whether full-length rollers actually form a direct technological stage leading to true wheels and axles. Some reconstructions suggest plausible transitions. Others emphasize that no clear archaeological sequence proves that people simply narrow a roller until wheels appear at both ends. The temptation to create a tidy progression is strong. Roller becomes narrowed roller becomes axle. Axle receives separate wheels. Finished. History smiles for the diagram. Reality may refuse. Different craftspeople could arrive at similar mechanisms through different routes. Knowledge from drilling, carpentry, pottery, sled construction, animal harnessing, or rotating tools might combine in ways that cannot now be traced. No agreement has been reached on whether the wheel emerges from one obvious predecessor. What matters is that the mechanical problem becomes increasingly precise. You no longer ask only, how can a heavy thing move? You ask something more difficult. How can a circular component rotate continuously while carrying a structure that does not rotate with it? That is an extraordinary question, and the answer requires a relationship between stationary and moving parts. Your platform must remain upright. The rotating element must turn beneath it. One part holds. One part spins. The boundary between them becomes the heart of the machine. You run a hand over a smoothed wooden surface where an axle might sit. The grain is rough beneath your fingertips. Even polished timber is imperfect. Under weight, the axle presses hard against its bearing. Dust enters. Moisture swells the wood. Dry weather shrinks it. Nothing stays precisely the same size. A device that turns beautifully in the morning may seize after rain. Craftsmanship must account for living material. Wood expands, wood cracks, wood bends. A successful machine therefore depends on maintenance as much as invention. Someone must inspect the joints. Someone must replace worn pegs. Someone must add lubricant. Someone must notice the tiny split that will become a large split at the most inconvenient possible moment. The wheel, when it comes, is not a magical object that removes work. It creates an entirely new category of work, repair. Still, the promise is unmistakable. A roller that stays with the load eliminates the exhausting cycle of carrying timber from rear to front. A rotating support can travel continuously. Longer distances become imaginable. Loads can move with fewer interruptions. The vehicle begins to become a system rather than a trick. You push again. The wood groans. A cylindrical element rotates beneath the frame. This time it remains trapped in position. The platform advances across the hard earth in a slow, uncertain line. Nobody cheers. People are too busy watching where it fails. One end drifts, a support rubs, a joint loosens, the machine stops. Hands immediately reach toward it, not because the idea is finished, because it is finally interesting enough to improve. The most important part of the wheel is not the wheel. It is the place where the wheel meets the axle. You crouch beside a wooden vehicle frame on hard-packed earth and run your fingers over a polished shaft. The wood is smooth in some places and slightly rough in others. Sawdust clings to the grain, somewhere nearby. A carpenter taps a peg into place with a stone-headed mallet, each strike soft and dull in the afternoon air. Nothing about the machine looks magical. 2 wooden discs stand upright on either side. A thick axle spans the space between them. Above it rests the load, and the entire success of the contraption depends on whether certain pieces turn while certain other pieces remain still. That is the puzzle. If the wheels are fixed tightly to the axle, then wheels and axle rotate together. If the axle is fixed tightly to the vehicle body, then the wheels must rotate independently around it. Both arrangements are possible. Both create different engineering problems. And neither works well unless the craftspeople understand fit with remarkable care. You lift one wheel slightly. It is heavier than it looks. Early solid wooden wheels can be thick, dense objects made not from one conveniently enormous perfect slice of trunk, but often from several wooden planks joined together. That detail matters. A tree large enough to provide a broad, flat, strong disc from a single cross-section is not always available, and slicing across the grain produces wood that can crack badly. Planks offer another method. You place several side by side. You join them with battens, cleats, or carefully shaped connectors. Then you cut or trim the assembly into something approaching a circle. Approaching is the important word. Perfect circles are a luxury. A wooden wheel can wobble a little and still function. It can be slightly uneven and still move a cart. The ride will simply remind your spine that prehistoric suspension is not a feature. You press your palm against the wheel's face. The surface shows marks from shaping tools. The center contains a hole. That hole is everything. Make it too small and the axle will not enter. Make it too large and the wheel will rattle, tilt, and wear unevenly. Make it slightly off-center and every rotation lifts and drops the vehicle. A few millimeters of error can become a repeated mechanical complaint. Thump, rise, thump, fall, again and again. Now imagine producing that center hole without a steel drill press, measuring laser, or precision lathe. You rely on hand tools. You mark the center by eye or geometry learned through practice. You bore slowly. You widen the hole. You test the fit. You remove more wood. You test again. Craftsmanship becomes a conversation between hand and material. The wheel tells you what is wrong through resistance. The axle tells you through noise. The frame tells you through movement. A successful fit is not silent perfection. It is simply good enough to survive the journey. Records confirm that early wheeled vehicles in parts of Europe and Western Eurasia use heavy solid wooden wheels and robust axle arrangements by the late 4th millennium before the Common Era. Those vehicles are not delicate. They are agricultural machines, transport platforms, and hauling devices built for weight rather than speed. You can feel that priority immediately. The wood is thick, the axle is stout, the frame is broad. Nothing is trying to win a race. The goal is to move things that would otherwise be exhausting to carry. Grain, timber, clay, stone, household goods, perhaps people. The wheel is not yet an emblem of speed. It is an emblem of leverage over weight. The axle provides that leverage by creating a stable relationship between the load and the rotating surfaces below. One arrangement uses a fixed axle. The axle remains attached to the frame. Each wheel turns around the axle ends. This requires the wheel hubs to rotate smoothly against the shaft. The rubbing surfaces need careful shaping. Too tight, and friction stops the wheel. Too loose, and the vehicle becomes unstable. Another arrangement fixes the wheels to the axle. Now the entire axle rotates beneath the vehicle. The axle must turn inside bearings attached to the frame. In this system, the wheels and axle behave like one long rotating unit. Again, Friction concentrates at specific contact points. You can almost smell the problem. Wood rubbing under pressure heats. A dry bearing begins to squeak. The sound rises with every turn. A little animal fat or plant oil worked into the contact surface can reduce resistance. The squeak softens. The vehicle moves more freely. A council decree proves nothing about the very first axle makers, because written governments do not yet stand beside these workshops, issuing helpful technical manuals. But surviving archaeological finds make clear that these early vehicle builders possess a practical understanding of joints, rotating surfaces, and structural loading. They know enough to make the machine work. That is more impressive than it sounds. A wheel must support vertical weight while also surviving sideways forces. The axle must resist bending. The wheel center must endure repeated pressure. The frame must distribute the load. If one side carries more weight than the other, the vehicle pulls unevenly. If the axle is too thin, it can flex or break. If the bearing is weak, the frame may split. If the wheel is too narrow, it may sink deeply into soft ground. Every improvement creates another trade-off. Make the wheel wider and it spreads weight better, but becomes heavier. Make the axle thicker and it becomes stronger, but increases mass. Make the fit tighter and the machine becomes stable. But friction rises. Engineering enters quietly through compromise. You do not search for perfection. You search for the combination that fails least often. Oddly enough, the earliest wheels probably make travel less comfortable in some ways, even as they make transport easier. A solid wooden wheel transmits every bump directly upward. There are no rubber tires, no springs, no padded seats. A rut in the road becomes a whole-body experience. A stone beneath one wheel lifts the load sharply. A shallow hole produces a jolt. If you ride on the vehicle rather than walk beside it, you quickly learn that technological progress is sometimes best appreciated while standing. The axle also creates a turning problem. A vehicle moving in a straight line is relatively simple. A vehicle turning is not. The outer wheel must travel farther than the inner wheel. If both wheels are rigidly fixed to one axle, they rotate at the same speed. During a turn, something has to slip against the ground. On hard soil, this produces resistance. On soft soil, it can dig ruts. A light vehicle may manage easily enough. A heavy loaded cart can resist turning like a stubborn animal. You pull from the front. Someone pushes from the side. The wheels grind through the curve. There is no steering wheel. There is no differential. There is only geometry making itself unpleasant. This limitation shapes how early carts are used. Broad paths help. Gentle curves help. Level ground helps. The technology does not erase the landscape. It negotiates with it. Cold mud grips the wheels. Deep sand swallows them. Rocky slopes punish the axle. Wet clay cakes around the wooden discs until they grow heavier with every rotation. A wheel can reduce one kind of resistance while introducing entirely new problems. That is why the axle is so important. It transforms rotation into a repeatable mechanical relationship, but it also demands roads, maintenance, carpentry, and handling skills. You are no longer using an isolated trick. You are operating a machine. Scholars bicker for which axle arrangement appears first in particular regions and how much variation exists among the earliest vehicle traditions. The surviving evidence is frustratingly incomplete, because wood rarely survives under ordinary conditions. Some exceptional finds preserve wheels or axles in waterlogged soils. Others survive indirectly through track marks, miniature models, artistic images, and the traces of vehicle use. Arguments split along questions of function, chronology, and construction. No single design sweeps across every region in exactly the same form. That is hardly surprising. A craftsperson working in a forested wetland has different materials and terrain from one working on a dry open plain. Local wood species matter, available tools matter, animal power matters. So does tradition. One community may prefer a rotating axle. Another may favour wheels turning on fixed axle ends. A third may modify the frame to cope with local ground. Technology spreads, but it rarely arrives unchanged. You hear a mallet strike again. The carpenter removes a wheel. The centre hole is rubbed smooth with a tool. A little material comes away. The wheel is replaced. Someone pushes the vehicle. It turns more easily now. That small adjustment may be the difference between a mechanism that merely exists and a mechanism worth using. A curious footnote lies in the wear marks found on ancient wooden components. The polished surfaces around axle holes can reveal repeated motion, showing archaeologists where wood rubbed against wood during use. Wear is a kind of accidental handwriting. The machine leaves its history on itself. A groove deepens. A surface shines. A hole widens. The vehicle records thousands of rotations without anyone intending to record anything. You place your hand near the hub while the wheel turns. Not too close. The joint gives a low wooden murmur. The axle bears the frame. The wheel carries the axle. The ground supports the wheel. Each part depends on the next. This is the quiet brilliance of the system. You're not defeating gravity. You're redirecting it. Weight presses downward through a narrow chain of components, while rotation allows the contact point with the ground to change continuously. The heavy load rises only slightly as the wheel turns. Instead of dragging the entire underside of a platform across the earth, you concentrate movement into controlled rotating joints. That is why this device can feel transformative, not because circles are mysterious, because the axle organizes them. The sunlight grows softer on the timber. Dust settles into the shallow ruts beneath the wheels. The vehicle moves again, slowly this time, with a steady wooden rhythm. Creak, turn, creak, turn. The structure is crude by modern standards. Its parts are imperfect. Its bearings wear. Its wheels wobble. Its driver will probably discover several new reasons to complain before sunset. Yet the essential relationship is there. A load remains upright while the world beneath it rotates. Wood has become mechanism, and the axle has taught the wheel how to carry weight. The evidence begins to appear almost at once across a surprisingly wide stretch of land. You stand in the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, somewhere between the forests of Central Europe, the river valleys near the Black Sea, and the farming settlements farther east. The air is cool, a damp earth clings to your sandals. Cattle low behind a fence, somewhere beyond the houses. A pair of deep parallel grooves cuts across the ground. They are not natural. Something heavy has passed this way. The grooves lie at a regular distance from one another. The kind of spacing that makes archaeologists become very interested several thousand years later. A wheeled vehicle may have made them. This is where the story becomes both clearer and more confusing. Clearer, because physical evidence begins appearing. More confusing, because it appears in several regions within a relatively short period. You do not find one neat workshop with a sign over the door announcing the birthplace of the wheel. Instead, you find fragments, tracks, models, images, wooden components preserved in mud. Each clue whispers from a different landscape. One of the most famous pieces of evidence comes from a settlement near present-day Krakow in Poland known as Bronotec. There, a pottery vessel bears an incised design. The marks are simple, lines, shapes, a repeated motif that looks remarkably like a four-wheeled vehicle viewed from above or from the side in stylized form. The vessel dates to the late 4th millennium before the Common Era. You turn it slowly in your hands. The surface is rough. The decoration is not elegant in the way of royal palace art. There are no dramatic horses or heroic drivers, just a small pattern scratched into clay. Yet that little pattern becomes one of the strongest visual clues that people in Central Europe know wheeled transport at this early date. Records confirm that the Bronotec vessel belongs to a farming community associated with the funnel beaker cultural world. These communities keep livestock, cultivate crops, build substantial settlements, and maintain exchange networks across considerable distances. The wheel does not appear in an empty world. It enters societies already connected by trade, marriage, seasonal movement, craft knowledge, and shared customs. You can imagine information travelling with people. A visitor arrives from another settlement. Someone notices an unfamiliar vehicle. A carpenter studies the construction. A herder asks whether cattle can pull it. A child climbs onto it immediately, because that part of technological history requires no archaeological proof. Ideas move. So do objects. Now your attention shifts south and east. In the region around the northern Black Sea and the Pontic-Caspian steppe, burial traditions sometimes preserve evidence linked to early vehicles. Some graves contain parts interpreted as wheels or wagons. Others suggest that wheeled transport becomes important enough to accompany certain individuals into burial. That is significant. A technology used only as an occasional practical experiment might disappear without ceremony. A technology placed in a grave has acquired meaning. It may symbolize wealth, mobility, status, occupation, perhaps the ability to control animals and transport goods. The exact symbolism varies, and scholars are cautious about making every grave tell the same story. Still, something is changing. Vehicles are becoming visible not only as tools but as parts of social life. You walk farther through open grassland. The horizon seems enormous. Here, wheel transport has obvious attractions. Livestock can move over long distances. Pastoral communities need to carry tents, food, tools, children, hides, containers, and household belongings. A cart can extend how much a family or group moves at once. It can turn migration into something less dependent on what human shoulders can bear. But steppe terrain is not automatically perfect for wheels. Rain creates mud, dry ground cracks, streams cut through the landscape. There are no smooth modern roads. The wagon must be strong, slow, repairable. It is less a prehistoric sports car and more a stubborn wooden storage cupboard pulled by cattle. That is exactly what people need. Farther west, another remarkable discovery survives in wet ground. At sites in what is now Slovenia, ancient wooden wheels and axle components have been found in waterlogged conditions. One famous wheel from the Ljubljana marshes dates to roughly the late 4th or early 3rd millennium before the Common Era. The preservation is extraordinary because damp, oxygen-poor soil can protect wood that would normally rot away. You can see the construction. The wheel is made from joined wooden pieces. It is not an abstract symbol. It is a working object. The craftsmanship suddenly feels personal. Someone chooses the timber. Someone shapes the planks. Someone joins them. Someone cuts the central opening. Someone fits the axle. The object survives not because it is ceremonial gold or carved stone, but because mud happens to become a very patient archivist. Oddly enough, some of the best evidence for prehistoric woodworking comes from places where people would probably have complained bitterly about the wet conditions. Marshes are inconvenient for sandals, wonderful for archaeology. Wooden wheels from waterlogged sites reveal that these machines can be carefully engineered. Different species of timber may be selected for different properties. A wheel needs strength across the grain. An axle needs toughness. Joints need to resist splitting. The maker is not simply hacking a circle from whatever tree happens to be nearest. Material choice matters. Your fingers brush the damp grain. Oak may offer strength. Other woods may be chosen for flexibility or availability. The precise combination varies by place. This is not one universal wheel design copied without thought. It is technology being adapted to local environments. Then comes another category of evidence: tracks. At Flintbeck in northern Germany, prehistoric trackways preserved beneath burial mounds have been interpreted as some of the earliest wagon tracks known in Europe. Parallel ruts cut into the ground suggest repeated passage by wheeled vehicles. The dating falls within the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, A council decree proves nothing here because there is no written administration documenting traffic rules. The earth itself keeps the record. You stand over the grooves. They are humble, almost boring. That is why they are powerful. A decorated pot might be symbolic. A model might represent something imagined. Parallel ruts in compacted soil are harder to dismiss. Something repeatedly rolls. Weight presses downward. Wheels carve lines. The road becomes evidence. Across parts of Mesopotamia, pictorial and model evidence also begins to suggest wheeled vehicles around a similar general period. Clay tablets and early images from urbanizing communities depict carts or sled-like vehicles with wheels. The dating and interpretation of specific examples can be complicated, but the broader pattern is unmistakable. By the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, wheeled transport is known across multiple parts of Europe and Southwest Asia. That geographical spread is astonishing. You're looking at distances of thousands of kilometers. Travel is slow. Messages move at walking speed, animal speed, or boat speed. There are no printing presses, no technical manuals, no engineering schools. Yet within a relatively narrow archaeological window, the wheel appears across a vast zone. This is where historians become restless. Did one region invent wheeled transport first? Does the idea spread rapidly through exchange networks? Do several communities reach similar solutions independently? The evidence refuses to give an easy answer. Scholars still argue whether the earliest known wheeled vehicles point to a single origin or multiple centers of invention. Chronology is difficult because dating prehistoric layers involves ranges, not perfectly stamped calendar years. A wooden wheel can be dated. A track can be dated through surrounding material. A ceramic image can be assigned to a cultural phase, but determining which one comes first by a few decades can be almost impossible. And a few decades matter if you're trying to identify an inventor. Suppose one site produces evidence from around 3,500 before the Common Era. Another produces evidence that might be a century earlier or later. The uncertainty overlaps. Suddenly both regions can claim priority. Archaeology becomes less like finding a winner and more like listening to several people speak at once through a thick wall. One scandalous aside is that national pride has occasionally complicated discussions of ancient inventions. Modern countries naturally enjoy pointing to discoveries within their borders. A wheel found here becomes our wheel. A wagon image found there becomes our invention. But prehistoric people do not recognize modern borders. The carpenter shaping a wheel in Central Europe does not know that one day the workshop will fall inside a nation with a flag, a tourism board, and a museum gift shop. Technology moves through human networks, not future maps. That matters especially in this period. Communities exchange copper, stone, shell, amber, livestock, ceramics, ideas. Long-distance contact is not constant, but it is real. A useful vehicle design can travel without the vehicle itself. Someone only needs to see the basic principle and reproduce it with local materials. You can imagine the conversation. How did you move all that grain? We put the load on a platform. Yes, obviously. Under the platform, 2 round wooden pieces. Round pieces they turn. That explanation might be enough for an experienced craftsperson, or perhaps a visiting carpenter sees the mechanism directly. Perhaps a family migrates and carries the knowledge with them. Perhaps communities invent similar solutions because they face similar pressures. Arguments split along all these possibilities. Some scholars emphasize the remarkable closeness of early dates and see rapid diffusion as likely. Others point out that the mechanical ingredients of wheeled transport are widespread enough for independent invention to remain plausible. No agreement has been reached on whether one community deserves the title of first inventor. Perhaps the question itself is too modern. Invention may not belong to a single person. One craftsperson improves the wheel joint, another strengthens the axle, another changes the frame, another realizes cattle can pull the load, another creates a better harness. The useful machine emerges from accumulated adjustments. Your ears catch the low creak of wood. A cart approaches along the settlement path. 2 cattle pull slowly. The vehicle is broad and heavy, its solid wheels press deeply into the earth. A basket rests on the platform. There are sacks beside it. A child sits among them, looking entirely unimpressed by participating in a transportation revolution. The cart passes. The wheels turn. Dust settles. And that ordinary scene may be the greatest sign that the technology has succeeded. It no longer looks miraculous. It looks useful. Across a vast part of Eurasia, communities are beginning to make the same discovery. The wheel has left the workshop. It has entered the road. You're standing in the middle of an argument that has lasted far longer than any wooden cart. Around you lie clues from several regions, each one inconveniently ancient, each one close enough in date to make certainty slippery. A carved image here, a preserved wheel there, a set of ruts somewhere else, a burial containing vehicle parts, a clay model, a fragment, a guess strengthened by another fragment. Everyone wants the same answer. Where was the wheel invented? It sounds like a simple question. It is not. You might imagine one gifted craftsperson shaping the first successful wheel, stepping back from the vehicle and realizing that life has just become easier. Perhaps neighbors gather. Perhaps someone laughs. Perhaps another person immediately asks whether it can carry twice as much. That scene is satisfying. It is also almost certainly impossible to prove. Prehistoric invention leaves very poor paperwork. There is no patent, no dated workshop ledger, no carved plaque declaring that a certain person invented wheeled transport on a particular morning and would appreciate proper credit. Instead, you have archaeology, and archaeology rarely gives neat ownership. The first difficulty is time. Dates from the late 4th millennium before the Common Era often come with ranges. Organic material may be radiocarbon dated, but those dates require calibration and interpretation. A wooden object might have been made from timber already some years old. A settlement layer can contain material deposited over a period rather than on one exact day. So when 2 early wheeled finds appear separated by what looks like a century, that gap may be less secure than it seems. If the ranges overlap, priority becomes difficult to establish. You can almost hear the scholars sigh. One site looks earlier. Then a new test narrows the range. Another site moves forward. A different find appears. The ranking shifts again. History refuses to behave like a sports table. Records confirm that evidence for wheeled transport emerges across parts of Central and Eastern Europe, the steppe zone, and Southwest Asia within a surprisingly compressed span of prehistoric time. That fact creates the great puzzle. Either the wheel is invented in one place and spreads very quickly, or several communities develop it independently, or some mixture of invention, borrowing, adaptation, and reinvention occurs. All 3 possibilities have supporters. You begin with the single origin idea. It is attractive because complex technology is often spread. If one community develops a practical wheeled vehicle, nearby groups do not need to rediscover every mechanical principle from nothing. They can observe the machine, copy it, modify it, and teach others. Useful technologies travel. People themselves travel too. Herders move livestock. Traders carry goods. Families marry across communities. Craft specialists relocate. Seasonal gatherings bring distant groups into contact. A wagon seen once can become a memory carried for hundreds of kilometers. Imagine being a carpenter who has never seen such a machine. A visitor arrives with a strange wooden platform. The load sits above 2 rotating assemblies. You watch it move. That single observation could reorganize your understanding of transport. You do not need an instruction manual. You need to understand the principle. The rest can be reconstructed. This makes rapid diffusion plausible. But how rapid that is where the map becomes demanding. The earliest known evidence appears across a huge area. To explain everything through one birthplace, The idea may have to travel remarkable distances in relatively few generations. That is possible. Prehistoric Europe and Western Asia are not isolated islands. Exchange networks can connect communities indirectly across great distances. A piece of amber can travel far from its source. Copper objects can move. Stone tools made from distinctive materials appear hundreds of kilometers from where the raw stone originates. Ideas are lighter than amber. They do not need a cart to travel. There is gentle irony in that. The concept of wheeled transport may spread faster than wheeled transport itself, yet the single origin model raises another problem. Which place gets the honour? Central Europe offers early evidence. The Black Sea and steppe regions offer early evidence. Mesopotamia offers early imagery and models. The Caucasus and surrounding zones enter some versions of the argument. Each candidate comes with archaeological strengths and chronological complications. No one has found the prehistoric equivalent of a signed confession, so scholars compare patterns. If the earliest vehicles in several regions share very similar construction, that may suggest common ancestry. If they differ significantly, independent development becomes more plausible. But even that is tricky. Borrowed technologies change. A community may copy the concept but rebuild it using local wood, local tools, local animals, and local craft traditions. A copied wagon can look different within a generation. You know this from modern technology. Give the same basic idea to several workshops and the results quickly diverge. Human beings are excellent at refusing to leave useful things alone. Oddly enough, one of the strongest arguments against searching for a single heroic inventor is that the wheel is not really one invention. It is a package. You need a suitable wheel. You need an axle arrangement. You need a frame. You need a way to join those components. You need appropriate draft animals if the vehicle is going to move serious weight efficiently. You need routes where the vehicle can function. You need maintenance skills. You need carpenters capable of replacing damaged parts. A wheel by itself is a round piece of wood with ambitions. A transportation system requires much more. This makes independent invention easier to imagine in one sense. Many communities already possess the necessary ingredients. Woodworking is widespread. Animal traction exists in several regions. Rotating tools are familiar. Heavy loads need moving. People understand circular forms. Perhaps once societies reach a certain combination of craft skill and economic need, wheeled transport becomes a solution that more than one community can discover. That is the multiple origin argument. You picture several workshops separated by enormous distances. None knows what the others are doing. In one, a carpenter experiments with a rotating axle. In another, someone modifies a heavy transport platform. Elsewhere, cattle are already pulling sledges, encouraging people to think about reducing resistance. Similar problems produce similar answers. Nature does this constantly. Different societies invent agriculture independently. Different communities develop pottery. Metallurgy emerges in more than one setting. Why should the wheel be unique? The objection is probability. Wheeled vehicles are mechanically demanding enough that simultaneous independent invention across several regions within a narrow period may seem suspicious. The timing looks almost too convenient. If humans are capable of inventing wheels independently whenever conditions suit them, why does strong evidence cluster around roughly the same broad era? Why not several thousand years earlier in one place and several thousand years later in another? That clustering encourages diffusion theories. A curious footnote complicates matters further. Not every society that knows about wheels uses them for transportation. Small wheeled objects, toys, rollers, or rotating devices can exist without producing practical carts. Knowing that circles turn does not automatically create road transport. This means archaeologists must distinguish between awareness of rotational mechanics and adoption of vehicles. The difference is social as much as mechanical. Suppose you see a wagon, you understand it, you even admire it, but your landscape is thick forest crossed by narrow paths. Your fields are terraced. Your animals are unsuitable for pulling. Timber is scarce. Boats already move heavy loads more efficiently. In that setting, copying the wagon may make little sense. Technology spreads only where it is useful enough to justify its costs. This matters when tracing origins. An invention can pass through a region without leaving abundant evidence if adoption is limited, or it can appear suddenly in the archaeological record after existing elsewhere for generations. The map you see is not necessarily the map of where ideas travel. It is the map of what happens to survive. Scholars bicker over this distinction constantly. Some emphasize technological diffusion through prehistoric exchange networks. Others stress local experimentation and independent problem-solving. Still others argue that the evidence supports a more tangled picture, with a basic idea moving between regions while communities independently redesign key components. That third possibility has a certain messy realism. You borrow the concept, you reinvent the details, someone else copies your improved version, the machine travels, changes, returns in another form. No agreement has been reached on whether one region can be confidently named as the birthplace of wheeled transport. And perhaps that uncertainty should not disappoint you. It may reveal something more interesting than a winner. Inventions rarely belong to isolated genius. They belong to communities. A craftsperson needs tools made by someone else. A vehicle builder depends on timber cutters. Animal handlers make hauling practical. Farmers create demand for moving surplus. Traders create routes. Repairers keep the machine alive. Children grow up seeing the technology and treat yesterday's miracle as ordinary equipment. Innovation becomes collective almost immediately. One scandalous aside from the history of scholarship is how often modern nationalism has tried to adopt ancient inventions as cultural trophies. A prehistoric wheel found within today's borders can become evidence that our ancestors were first. The problem is that the people who made it would not recognize those borders, modern languages, or national identities. You are dealing with communities whose political and cultural worlds are completely different. Claiming them too neatly can distort the past. The first wheel belongs less comfortably to a modern country than people sometimes wish. You walk across an imaginary prehistoric map. There are no border lines, only rivers, mountains, grasslands, forests, wetlands, trails, settlements, seasonal camps, exchange routes. You hear cattle bells in one valley and woodworking in another. A traveller carries a copper object, another carries a story. Someone has seen a vehicle, someone has heard of one, someone thinks they can build it better. This is probably closer to the real texture of technological change. Not a flash, a network, not a lone inventor, a chain of observations. The wheel may have one birthplace. It may have several. The evidence still refuses to settle the matter, and beneath that uncertainty lies a calmer conclusion. The important transformation is not that one unknown person discovers a circle. It is that communities across a wide world begin understanding how rotation, carpentry, animal power, and transport can be joined into a durable system. The invention is real. The inventor remains in shadow. Perhaps that is appropriate. The wheel becomes famous. The hands that make it disappear. You begin with a tree, not a perfect tree naturally. Ancient carpenters not blessed with forests full of identical trunks, politely waiting to become machinery. One tree twists toward the light. Another hides a knot exactly where you do not want one. A third looks promising until the first cut reveals a crack running deep through the grain. So you choose carefully. Your palm rests against rough bark while you study the trunk. You're looking for strength, size, grain, and the inconvenient question of how much useful timber can be taken from a living shape. A wheel begins long before anything becomes round. It begins with wood selection. Strong hardwoods can endure repeated stress, but they are harder to shape. Softer woods are easier to work. but may wear quickly or split under load. Certain species behave well when dry. Others warp. Some survive pressure around a central opening better than others. You do not have a handbook explaining these properties. You have experience. A carpenter remembers which tree produced an axle that cracked. A relative remembers which timber lasted through several seasons. A builder notices which wood accepts a peg without splitting. Knowledge accumulates through hands, scars, repairs, and occasional language that is probably not suitable for a peaceful bedtime narration. The tree comes down. Stone and copper tools may be available depending on place and period. An axe bites slowly into the trunk. Wedges help split large sections. Adzes shape surfaces. Scrapers smooth them. Drills create holes. There is no electric saw, no lathe, no circular cutting jig. Every large wooden component requires time. You hear the repeated knock of tool against timber. Chip, pause. Chip, pause. The scent of fresh wood rises into the air, sharp and clean. A wheel does not necessarily begin as a circular slice taken straight through the trunk. That method seems obvious until you look closely at wood. A disc cut across the trunk contains grain arranged in ways that can encourage radial cracking as the timber dries. Large suitable trunks may also be scarce, so ancient wheel makers can build discs from planks. You lay several boards beside one another. Now you have a broad wooden panel. It does not look like a wheel. It looks like a door someone has misplaced. The pieces must be joined strongly enough that the finished disc survives repeated impacts. This is where prehistoric carpentry becomes far more sophisticated than the phrase wooden wheel suggests. Planks can be held together by transverse battens fitted into grooves, by wooden connectors, by shaped joints, and by other methods that vary across surviving examples. Records confirm that some prehistoric solid wheels are built from multiple wooden pieces rather than carved from a single trunk. The joins must resist movement. Every rotation stresses them. Every bump tries to shake the wheel apart. Every change in moisture encourages the separate pieces to swell or shrink. You fit one board against another. The edge is not quite straight. You scrape it. Test again. Scrape. Test. Ancient manufacturing is often repetition disguised as craftsmanship. Then comes the circle. How do you make one without modern measuring equipment? A cord offers a wonderfully simple solution. Fix one end near the center of the wooden panel. Stretch it outward. Hold a piece of charcoal, pigment, or pointed tool at the other end. Move around the center. A circular line appears. You have made a compass from string. The geometry does not need a name. It only needs to work. The carpenter studies the line, then begins removing everything outside it. This is not a delicate process at first. Large corners come away. The rough shape becomes many-sided. More trimming follows. The wheel slowly becomes rounder, not mathematically perfect. Functionally round. That distinction saves a great deal of effort. A prehistoric cart can tolerate some irregularity. Your teeth may object, but the machine survives. Oddly enough, a slightly imperfect wheel can still travel surprisingly well if the axle hole is well centered. A beautifully circular wheel with an off-center hub can produce a much worse ride. So the most important measurement may not be the outer edge. It may be the center. You mark it carefully. Now you must create a hole large enough for an axle end or hub arrangement. This is slow work. A bow drill may rotate a boring tool back and forth. Other drilling methods use hand rotation, abrasives, cutting edges, or combinations of techniques. You press downward. The drill turns. Fine dust gathers around the opening. The smell changes slightly as friction warms the wood. You stop. Clear the hole. Begin again. The opening deepens. A large axle hole cannot simply be punched through in one heroic movement. Material must be removed gradually. The angle matters. If you bore crookedly, the wheel will sit badly. If you widen one side more than another, the fit becomes uneven. You test repeatedly. The axle end enters part way, too tight. remove it. Scrape the interior, try again. Still tight. More scraping. Try again. Now loose on one side. A quiet silence falls over the workshop. Everyone recognizes the expression on the carpenter's face. There is no button marked undo. This is why skill matters. The difference between success and firewood may be a small amount of removed material. Ancient woodworkers develop an intimate sense of thickness. Your fingers become measuring tools. Your eyes notice tiny changes in alignment. Your ears hear whether a joint sits correctly. The craft is tactile. Cold iron tools are not available in the earliest workshops. So, stone, bone, antler, and early metal edges must do the work. A stone adze can still be extremely effective when sharpened and used by an experienced hand. Modern people sometimes underestimate such tools because they imagine technology as a simple contest between primitive and advanced. The wood does not care about the label, it cares whether the edge is sharp. One scandalous aside is that experimental archaeologists who try reproducing ancient woodworking often discover that the embarrassing limitation is not the tool. It is the modern person holding it. A skilled craftsperson with a stone axe can work with astonishing efficiency. An inexperienced volunteer with the same axe can spend a long afternoon producing something that resembles a damaged stool. Technique matters more than appearances suggest. You turn your attention to the wheel's thickness. Too thin and it may split. Too thick and it becomes unnecessarily heavy. Weight is complicated. A heavy solid wheel resists damage and can carry substantial loads, but every extra piece of timber must itself be moved. The vehicle carries its cargo and its own machinery. There is no point building an indestructible wheel if the draft animals exhaust themselves hauling the wheel rather than the harvest. The edge must also endure direct contact with the ground. Stone, dry soil, packed clay, roots, ruts, sand. Each surface wears wood differently. There are no pneumatic tyres protecting the rim. The wheel itself meets the landscape. You inspect the outer edge. A sharp corner can chip. A slightly rounded profile may endure better. The precise shape depends on local tradition and use. The craftsman smooths rough projections, not because the wheel must look elegant, because every protrusion will eventually announce itself through vibration. The finished disc is lifted upright. Several people help. It is heavy. Your fingers disappear beneath the rim as you guide it toward the axle. The fit is close. Wood touches wood. You push. The wheel slides into position. A peg or securing element may prevent it from wandering off the axle. Now comes the test. You rotate it. The disc turns, then catches. A slight adjustment follows. It turns farther. Another scrape. Another test. This is where tolerances become visible without anyone using the word tolerance. The gap between components must permit motion without allowing instability. Too much freedom creates wobble. Too little freedom creates friction. The ideal fit changes with moisture because wood itself changes. A wheel fitted on a dry afternoon may behave differently after rain. Timber absorbs water. It swells. A tight joint becomes tighter. Dry weather can shrink the same wood. A once perfect fit begins to rattle. The vehicle is never truly finished. It must be watched. Maintenance begins the moment construction ends. You keep spare pegs. You carry wedges. You know how to remove a wheel. You know how to smooth a bearing surface. You understand that the squeak from one side is not charming character. It is a warning. A curious footnote appears in preserved prehistoric wheels that show deliberate differences in wood orientation and assembly. Their makers are not merely producing circles. They are thinking about how grain direction affects strength. That is mechanical intelligence embedded in woodworking. The wheel looks simple because the cleverness is hidden inside the material. Scholars still argue whether specialized wheelwrights emerge immediately in early wheeled societies, or whether general carpenters initially make and repair these vehicles as part of broader woodworking traditions. The surviving evidence cannot easily reveal job titles. A beautifully made wheel demonstrates expertise. It does not tell you whether the maker spends every day producing wheels or also builds roofs, tools, gates, sledges, and furniture. Arguments split over how quickly technological specialization develops. Larger communities and greater vehicle use would eventually support dedicated expertise, but early production may remain distributed among highly skilled general craftspeople. You can imagine why specialization would become valuable. A broken bowl is inconvenient. A broken wheel several kilometers from home is a social event. Everyone gets involved. The load must be removed, the vehicle lifted, the damaged component examined. Perhaps the wheel can be repaired with a new brace. Perhaps a split can be bound. Perhaps the entire piece must be replaced. Wooden vehicles create their own repair economy. People who know how to maintain them become useful companions. You run your hand over a completed disc. Its surface is uneven enough to reveal the tool strokes. Tiny ridges remain. The joints are visible. The center hole is dark with lubricant and wear. Nothing about it resembles a polished museum reconstruction. It smells of timber, grease, earth, and use. The wheel is not beautiful because it is perfect. It is beautiful because it works. You push the vehicle forward. The disc rotates once, twice. A faint wobble travels through the frame. The carpenter watches closely. 3 times. 4. The joining planks hold. The central opening remains steady. The rim meets the ground and rises again. All that cutting, measuring, drilling, scraping, fitting, and testing has produced something deceptively simple. A circle. But you now understand how much knowledge is hidden inside that shape. A wooden cart can exist perfectly well without an animal. It is just much more useful when something stronger than you agrees to pull it. You stand beside a pair of cattle in the cool light of morning. Their breath hangs faintly in the air. Leather and fibre straps creak as someone adjusts a wooden yoke across their shoulders. One animal flicks an ear at a fly. The other stares into the distance with the calm expression of a creature that has not been consulted about humanity's latest transportation plans. The cart waits behind them. Its frame is loaded with sacks. The wheels sit low and solid against the ground. A rope tightens, the cattle lean forward, and suddenly the technology changes scale. Human muscle can move a cart. Animal muscle can make the cart part of an economy. That distinction matters. A person pulling a load must spend energy that could otherwise go into farming, building, cooking, tending animals, or sleeping somewhere in the shade while claiming to supervise. A strong draft animal converts grass, grain, water, and patient training into pulling power. For agricultural communities, this is enormously valuable. Cattle already matter for meat, milk in some societies, hides, manure, and breeding wealth. Once they're trained for traction, they become sources of mechanical energy. You do not need an engine. You have an ox. More accurately, you may have a castrated adult male cattle trained for work, though cows and bulls can also serve depending on local practice. Training matters almost as much as strength. An animal that panics beside a creaking cart is not useful. An animal that refuses to move is also not useful, though at least it is easier to locate. Young cattle must become accustomed to human commands, harness equipment, pressure from the yoke, noise from the vehicle, and working beside another animal. You hear the handler's voice, a short call, a touch with a guiding stick. The pair steps forward together. Synchronization matters. If one animal pulls hard while the other wanders sideways toward an interesting patch of grass, efficiency declines rather dramatically. The yoke helps coordinate them. A common arrangement places a wooden beam across the necks or shoulders of 2 cattle, distributing the pulling force while keeping them paired. The exact harnessing system can vary by place and period, and not every reconstructed early arrangement is known with certainty. Still, the basic principle is clear. Animal and vehicle become mechanically connected. The cart no longer depends mainly on people pushing from behind. Now a living power source walks in front. Records confirm that cattle traction becomes deeply important in early agricultural societies, not only for transport but also for pulling ploughs and other heavy equipment. This combination transforms the practical value of domesticated animals. A herd is no longer only stored food and wealth, it can perform work. That changes how much land can be cultivated, how much material can be moved, and how far heavy goods can travel. Imagine harvest season. The fields stretch beyond the settlement. Bundles of grain must come home. Without a cart, people carry them in baskets, sacks, slings, or repeated armloads. With cattle and a wagon, the problem becomes different. You pile the harvest high, the animals pull. One journey carries what might otherwise require many human trips. There are limits, of course. The cart cannot carry infinity, despite the enthusiasm of whoever is loading it. Too much weight strains the axle. The wheels sink into soft earth. The animals slow. A badly balanced load shifts sideways. Someone eventually has to remove several sacks while pretending this was always the plan. Yet even with these limitations, draft power expands what is practical. Timber can move from woodland to settlement. Clay can travel from a good deposit to a pottery workshop. Stone can be carried farther. Food surpluses can reach storage buildings. Household belongings can accompany migrating families. Water containers can travel where wells or streams are distant. The cart becomes a bridge between places. This changes settlement geography in subtle ways. A community no longer needs every useful resource to sit within comfortable carrying distance. A good clay source can lie farther away. A grazing area can be more distant. Fields can spread. Trade routes can carry bulkier goods. The wheel does not make distance disappear. Animal traction makes distance less expensive. You walk beside the cart as it creaks along a dirt track. The cattle move slowly, very slowly. This is not fast transportation. A healthy walking person can easily keep pace. The advantage is not speed, it is carrying capacity. That can feel strange from a modern perspective because wheels are strongly associated with going faster. Early carts are often valuable precisely because they allow you to go slowly with much more stuff. There's something profoundly agricultural about that. No hurry. Just several 100 kilograms of grain coming with you. Oddly enough, cattle themselves can become part of a community's soundscape of transport. Bells, wooden clappers, shouted commands, hoof beats, and axle squeaks make approaching carts recognizable before they come into view. You might be sitting inside a house and know who is arriving simply from the rhythm outside. One household's axle squeals at every turn. Another cart has a loose board that knocks steadily against the frame. A particular ox wears a bell. Transportation acquires an acoustic identity. The road speaks. Animal power also creates new problems. The animals need food. They need water. They tire. They become sick. They can injure their hooves. They may refuse difficult ground. A cart stuck in mud is inconvenient. A cart stuck in mud with two irritated cattle attached to it becomes theatre. You push from behind. The handler urges them forward. The wheels spin. Mud climbs the rim. Someone places branches beneath the tires. The cattle pull again. The vehicle lurches free. Everyone is suddenly covered in mud except, somehow, the person giving instructions. Technology has reduced labour. It has not eliminated comedy. The best routes begin to matter more. A cart performs well on firm, relatively level ground. Repeated traffic can create tracks. Tracks become paths. Paths can deepen into ruts. Communities may clear obstacles, fill holes, stabilize wet areas, or choose routes that avoid steep slopes. In this way, vehicles influence landscapes. Useful path attracts more traffic. More traffic makes the route socially important. Settlements positioned near good crossings or transport corridors can benefit. Trade becomes easier when bulk goods are easier to move. You might now exchange more than rare ornaments or lightweight valuables. Foodstuffs, pottery, timber, hides, and other heavy products can travel in larger quantities where roads and animals permit. That does not suddenly create a modern commercial network. Most movement remains local or regional. But the economics of weight begin to change. One cart can carry many vessels. One team can haul agricultural surplus. A trader can move goods that would be miserable to transport on foot. The wagon becomes a kind of mobile storage platform. A curious footnote appears in the way carts can support pastoral mobility. For communities moving with herds across open landscapes, a wagon can carry children, tools, tents or shelter materials, food stores, and household goods while adults manage livestock. This does not mean every pastoral society immediately becomes wagon dependent, but where terrain allows it, wheeled transport can make a more mobile household possible. The family does not have to reduce every possession to what can fit on a human back. A cart lets domestic life travel. You can picture blankets bundled on the platform, ceramic containers secured among baskets, wooden tools tied to the side, a sleepy child tucked between sacks. Perhaps an older person rides as well. The vehicle becomes more than freight equipment. It becomes a moving piece of home. That creates another social change. Who controls the draft animals? Who owns the vehicle? Who maintains it? A household with several cattle and a sturdy wagon possesses a practical advantage. It can haul larger harvests. It can help neighbours. It can move materials for construction. It can travel with more goods. Vehicles may therefore become symbols of wealth as well as tools. A cart requires resources, timber, labour, skilled construction, animals, feed, maintenance. Not every household necessarily owns one. Sharing may be common, borrowing may occur, obligations may develop around access to traction animals. You can almost hear negotiations forming. You may use my oxen for your harvest. You help repair my fence. I haul your timber. You assist during planting. Technology becomes woven into social relationships. The cart is not merely a machine. It is a reason for people to owe each other favours. Scholars still argue whether the spread of wheeled vehicles primarily follows existing cattle traction, or whether carts themselves encourage communities to increase the use and breeding of draft animals. The relationship probably varies by region. Some communities already use cattle for heavy work and can adapt them readily to vehicles elsewhere. The usefulness of carts may create stronger incentives to train animals specifically for pulling. Arguments split over how tightly the expansion of animal traction, agricultural intensification, and vehicle adoption should be linked. The evidence rarely preserves the precise order. Bones can reveal cattle populations. Joint changes may sometimes suggest repeated physical labour. Vehicle traces reveal movement. But motivations are harder to recover. An ancient herder does not leave a diary explaining that the family has decided to train another pair of oxen because transportation costs are becoming unacceptable. You infer from patterns. Still, the basic partnership is unmistakable. Wheel technology becomes far more consequential when joined to animal power. The cart multiplies the usefulness of the animal. The animal multiplies the usefulness of the cart. Each strengthens the value of the other. You place a hand against the side of the vehicle as it rolls. The wooden frame vibrates gently. Hooves strike packed soil in a slow rhythm. The animals breathe heavily but steadily. Behind them, the load moves with an ease that would have demanded many human shoulders. The transformation is not dramatic to watch. There is no flash, no roar, no sudden burst of speed. Just two cattle walking, a pair of wheels turning, a heavy harvest moving home. And in that quiet combination, transportation becomes something larger than craftsmanship. It becomes infrastructure for daily life. The first thing you notice is the sound, not the deep wooden groan of a heavy solid wheel grinding over uneven ground, but something lighter, quicker, almost delicate, a rapid clatter, a sharper creak, the beat of hooves. Dust lifts from the track as a two-wheeled vehicle passes in front of you, and for a moment it seems impossibly fast compared with the lumbering carts used for hauling grain, timber, and household goods. The wheels look different. They are not solid discs. They are mostly empty space. Thin wooden spokes stretch from a central hub to an outer rim, creating a structure that appears fragile until you realize how cleverly the forces are distributed. This is a major change. A solid wheel is strong but heavy. Every time it rotates, the animal pulling the vehicle must accelerate that mass. Every bump forces a large wooden disc upward. Every turn asks the vehicle to redirect considerable weight. If you want to carry sacks slowly across a field, this is acceptable. If you want speed, it becomes a problem. So craftspeople begin removing wood, not randomly, of course. Remove too much and the wheel collapses. Remove the right wood and the wheel becomes lighter while remaining strong enough to support the vehicle. The result is the spoked wheel. You crouch beside one while a craftsperson works. At the center sits a thick hub. This is the wheel's heart. It must receive the axle and endure repeated rotation, pressure, jolts, and sideways stress. From the hub extend several narrow spokes. Each spoke carries part of the load outward toward the rim. Around them is fitted a circular structure made from curved wooden sections. The whole wheel must remain true enough to rotate quickly without shaking itself apart. That is far more demanding than making a heavy farm wheel. Speed magnifies small mistakes. A tiny wobble at walking pace is merely irritating. At a faster pace, it becomes dangerous. The wheel must be light. It must also be accurate. You run a hand along the rim. The wood is smoother than the thick outer edge of a heavy wagon wheel. The joints are carefully fitted. The spokes meet the hub with precision. Nothing here can be loose. If one spoke shifts, the rim may distort. If the hub cracks, the entire structure fails. If the wheel loses its shape, the vehicle begins to bounce or pull sideways. The craftsperson therefore works with a different level of refinement. The wheel is no longer simply a strong circle. It is an engineered framework. Records confirm that spoked wheels are strongly associated with the development of light. Fast chariots during the early second millennium before the Common Era. Evidence appears across parts of Eurasia, with especially important early chariot remains associated with the Sintashta cultural horizon in the southern Ural region. These vehicles are much lighter than older four-wheeled wagons. They typically use two wheels. They are designed to carry a small number of people, and they are commonly linked with horses. That combination changes everything about what wheeled transport can do. A horse can move faster than an ox. A light vehicle can accelerate more quickly than a heavy wagon. Two-spoked wheels produce less rotating mass than four solid discs. The vehicle becomes suited not merely for hauling, but for rapid movement. You can feel the difference in your body. Climb onto a heavy wagon and you expect patience. Climb onto a light chariot and you immediately become aware of balance. There is little room. The platform may be narrow. The wheels stand on either side. The horse team pulls from the front. Every shift in weight matters. The vehicle turns. Your knees bend instinctively. One hand grips the side. The driver leans. Dust strikes your face. This is not relaxing agricultural transport. It is controlled instability, which, naturally, people find exciting. Oddly enough, the word chariot often creates an image of effortless elegance, polished wood, handsome horses, and dramatic sunlight. Actual riding is probably much rougher. There is no suspension in the modern sense. The road is uneven. The wheels strike stones. The axle transmits shock. The platform vibrates beneath your feet. If you're standing in the vehicle, Your legs become part of the suspension system. Congratulations, you are now a shock absorber. Chariots become associated with warfare in several ancient societies, but they are not useful only because they are fast. They also create status. A vehicle requiring trained horses, skilled wheelwrights, specialized harnessing, and constant maintenance is expensive. Not everyone owns one. That makes the chariot suitable for elites. Kings, warriors, nobles, couriers, and ceremonial figures can use them to display wealth and power. A person arriving on foot is one thing. A person arriving behind a matched team of horses in a gleaming two-wheeled vehicle sends a slightly different message. You hear the horses snort, metal fittings click, the driver tightens the reins, the chariot moves forward across parts of the ancient Near East, Egypt, Anatolia, and later Mediterranean societies. Chariots become deeply connected with political authority, warfare, hunting, and ceremony. Their exact military role varies. Some serve as mobile platforms for archers. Some carry elite fighters. Some may help commanders move rapidly. Others function partly as symbols of prestige. The image of the chariot becomes almost as important as the machine itself. A ruler depicted in a fast vehicle appears energetic, dominant, difficult to catch, and conveniently taller than everyone walking nearby. One scandalous aside concerns royal hunting scenes. Ancient kings are sometimes shown charging dramatically after lions or other dangerous animals from chariots, presenting the ruler as fearless. The scenes are impressive. They also tend to be carefully organized displays. Royal hunts may involve prepared spaces, handlers, controlled conditions, and a supporting staff making sure the king's bravery occurs with as much logistical assistance as possible. Heroism, like transportation, benefits from preparation. The spoked wheel makes this theatre possible because it allows speed without the crushing weight of a solid disc. But there is a price. Spoked wheels are harder to make. A heavy wheel can tolerate roughness. A light wheel depends on balance. The hub must be centered. The spokes must be similar in length and angle. The rim must fit tightly enough to distribute stress. Different woods may be chosen for different components. The hub benefits from dense, durable timber. Spokes need strength without excessive weight. Rim sections must withstand repeated impact. The wheelwright now manages several materials and several structural demands in one object. Craft specialization becomes more important. You cannot simply hand this job to someone who once made a reasonably good fence. The craftsperson must understand how wood behaves under compression, bendings, vibration, and repeated shock, even if none of those concepts are described using modern engineering language. The knowledge sits in practice. Tap a spoke. Listen. Too loose. Adjust it. Turn the wheel. Watch the rim. There is a slight deviation. Correct it. Test the hub. Add lubricant. Fit the axle. Test again. The wheel becomes a tuned structure. A curious footnote is that early spoked wheels can be made with relatively few spokes compared with many modern decorative wagon wheels. 4, 6, or other small numbers may be sufficient depending on design. More spokes are not automatically better. Each additional spoke adds weight and complexity. The goal is balance between strength and lightness. This is the central logic of the entire innovation. Remove mass without removing function. You see the same principle in many technologies. A bridge does not need to be a solid block if a framework distributes the forces. A roof does not need to be filled with timber if beams carry the load. A wheel does not need to be a disc if spokes connect hub and rim effectively. Empty space becomes part of the design. That is a sophisticated idea. The strength lies not in filling everything, but in placing material where it matters most. Scholars still argue whether the earliest true chariots developed primarily in the steppe zone and then spread outward, or whether related light vehicle traditions emerged through a more complicated exchange of horse culture, wheel technology, and elite warfare across several regions. The archaeological evidence from Sintashta burials is especially important because impressions and remains suggest light. Two-wheeled vehicles with spoked wheels by the early second millennium before the Common Era. Yet tracing the exact route by which chariot technology spreads remains difficult. Vehicles are wooden, horses travel, craftspeople travel, ideas travel, arguments split along the timing, terminology, and interpretation of the different finds. No agreement has been reached on whether every early light two-wheeled vehicle should even be called a chariot in the same technical sense. That may sound like scholarly fussiness. It is but useful fussiness. Words can create false certainty. A light cart used for transport is not necessarily the same thing as a military chariot. A ceremonial vehicle may resemble a war vehicle without serving the same role. Archaeologists therefore examine wheel spacing, burial context, horse equipment, vehicle dimensions, and wear patterns. A machine's function must be reconstructed from clues. You watch another chariot move across open ground. The horses gather speed. The wheels blur. This visual effect would be impossible with the old solid discs at the same weight and pace. The lighter rim responds quickly. The hub spins around the axle. The spokes become almost invisible. What was once a symbol of patient hauling has become a machine of motion. That changes warfare. A mobile archer can fire from a platform and move away quickly. A commander can shift position. Messages can travel rapidly across a battlefield. Elite fighters can approach, disengage, reposition, or display themselves before an army. Chariots do not dominate every landscape. They perform best on relatively open, firm ground, broken hills, dense forest, deep mud, and narrow paths reduce their advantages. Once again, terrain decides how useful a technology really is. A brilliant chariot in a swamp is mostly an expensive argument with mud, but on broad plains and prepared routes, speed becomes power. The spoked wheel also changes the meaning of distance for elites and messengers. A fast horse team can carry a light vehicle farther in a day than cattle hauling a heavy wagon. Road systems begin to matter even more. Courts that control horses, workshops, routes, and trained drivers can use movement as part of administration. The wheel has become connected not only to carrying things, but to projecting authority. You stand close as a wheelwright spins a finished wheel by hand. It turns smoothly. The rim makes a soft whisper against the air. No huge wooden disc blocks your view through the wheel. You can see daylight between the spokes. That emptiness is the achievement. Less wood, less weight, greater speed, more demanding craftsmanship. The wheel now looks almost familiar. It has changed from a massive rotating slab into a structure of hub, spokes, and rim, each part doing a precise job. The horses stamp, the driver steps aboard, the vehicle jolts forward, the spokes vanish into motion, and the wheel, once built mainly to make heavy loads easier, has learned how to become fast. The strangest thing about the wheel is that humanity does not need it everywhere. You stand on a narrow mountain trail where the ground falls sharply away to one side. Stones shift beneath your feet. Pines lean over the path. A mule walks ahead carrying two balanced packs, placing each hoof with the calm precision of an animal that has absolutely no interest in becoming a wagon. Now imagine bringing a wooden cart here. The wheels would strike rocks. The axle would catch against the slope. The vehicle would tilt. Someone would spend a miserable afternoon trying to prevent several hundred kilograms of cargo from taking a very direct route into the valley below. Suddenly, carrying the load on an animal's back looks remarkably advanced. This is the great correction to the simple story of the wheel. It is not an inevitable step on a ladder of civilization. It is a solution, and like every solution, it only makes sense where the problem, landscape, materials, and available power all cooperate. You can build sophisticated cities without depending heavily on wheeled transport. You can administer large states. You can construct monuments. You can trade across long distances. You can move armies. You can develop mathematics, astronomy, writing, agriculture, architecture, and complex political institutions. The wheel is useful. It is not a requirement for human achievement. The landscape decides much of its value. Walk into dense tropical forest. The ground is tangled with roots. Rain turns paths into mud. Vegetation quickly reclaims cleared routes. A wheeled vehicle needs enough width to pass between trees and enough firmness beneath it to keep its wheels from sinking. That means road building. Road building means labour. Labour means maintenance. A trail suitable for people can be narrow. A trail suitable for pack animals can remain relatively flexible. A road suitable for carts needs more attention. Suddenly the wheel comes with an invoice. Clear the vegetation, level the surface, bridge streams, fill holes, cut around steep slopes, repair damage from rain, maintain drainage, repeat next season. The wheel reduces transport effort only once you have created conditions where wheels can work. That is a crucial point. Technology does not simply adapt to environments. Sometimes environments must be altered to serve technology. You feel this clearly on a muddy path. A basket carried on your back may be exhausting, but your feet can choose firm patches. A pack animal can step around obstacles. A wheel has fewer options. Its path is dictated by the ground directly beneath it. One deep rut affects the whole vehicle. One fallen tree can stop it. One narrow bridge can become a serious engineering question. In steep mountains, the disadvantages become even clearer. A person can climb stairs. A llama can climb narrow Andean paths. A wheeled cart generally prefers not to discover what gravity has planned for it. This helps explain one of history's most famous examples. The Inca Empire develops an enormous and sophisticated road network across Western South America without making wheeled vehicles central to transportation. Records confirm that Inca roads extend for tens of thousands of kilometers across mountains, deserts, valleys, and high plateaus. Messengers travel rapidly along portions of the system. Armies move, food and supplies circulate, administrators connect distant regions. Yet loads are commonly carried by people and llamas rather than carts. The absence of practical wheeled transport does not indicate ignorance or incapacity. The Andes present extraordinary terrain, steep grades, stairways, suspension bridges, narrow mountain paths, and high-altitude routes favour feet over axles. Llamas are beautifully suited to these conditions. They carry modest loads. They move across difficult ground. They feed on available vegetation. They do not require a broad wagon road. Place a heavy cart behind one, and the arrangement loses much of its charm. Oddly enough, wheeled objects are known in parts of the ancient Americas. Small ceramic figures and objects with wheels appear in Mesoamerica, so at least some people clearly understand that round components can rotate on axles. The mechanical concept exists. What does not develop is a widespread system of animal-drawn wheeled transportation. That difference is wonderfully revealing. Knowing how to make wheels does not mean wheels are useful enough to transform your society. You need suitable draft animals. That is another major condition. Large parts of pre-Columbian America do not possess domesticated animals comparable to oxen or horses for pulling heavy vehicles. Llamas can carry packs but are not ideal substitutes for teams of cattle, hauling substantial carts. Humans can pull vehicles, of course. But if a cart requires extensive road construction and still depends on human muscle, the advantage may shrink. You might simply carry the load, or use a litter, or move goods by water. Rivers often make wheels almost irrelevant. Stand beside a broad waterway. A canoe slides quietly past. Several people sit inside. Bundles lie between them. The boat carries a load that would be tiresome to move overland. There is no axle, no road, no wheelwright. The river provides the surface. In regions rich with navigable waterways, boats can outperform carts for bulk transportation. Water supports weight. Friction is comparatively low. Large cargoes can move with modest effort. This remains true even in much later history. The most advanced wheeled wagon in the world can still lose badly to a good boat when the cargo's heavy and a river goes where you need it to go. You smell wet reeds along the bank. A paddle dips. The vessel drifts onward. Sometimes the most efficient road is liquid. A curious footnote is that even societies famous for wheeled transport often continue using sledges, pack animals, boats, and human carriers. The invention of the wheel does not cause older methods to vanish. Why would it? Each method has its preferred environment. Snow favours runners, mountains favour pack animals, rivers favour boats, smooth plains favour carts, urban streets may favour handcarts. A sensible society uses whatever works. Technology accumulates rather than replacing everything in neat stages. You now step into a desert. The ground seems open. Surely wheels belong here. Then you reach loose sand. The wooden rim sinks. The animal pulls harder. The wheel digs deeper. A camel carrying packs may cross the same terrain with much less preparation. Again, the supposedly more advanced device becomes the worst tool. There is a quiet lesson here. Efficiency depends on context. You cannot judge a technology while ignoring the landscape around it. The same cart that transforms agricultural transport on firm plains may become nearly useless in swamp, forest, mountain, or deep sand. Road building can overcome some of these limits. But roads themselves demand organised labour and political commitment. Large states may invest heavily in them because the benefits justify the cost. Smaller communities may not. Even a powerful state chooses strategically. You do not pave every hillside simply because wheels exist. You direct resources where traffic makes investment worthwhile. That creates networks. Main roads become arteries. Minor paths remain suitable for walking. Water routes carry heavy freight. Pack animals connect places carts cannot reach. The transportation system becomes a mixture. Scholars still argue whether environmental limitations alone explain the absence or limited use of wheeled transport in particular societies. Some emphasize terrain and the lack of suitable draft animals. Others point toward economic structure, available transport alternatives, social organization, road investment, and cultural choices. Arguments split because no single factor explains every region. A society may possess favorable terrain, but little reason to move heavy bulk goods overland. Another may have draft animals, but better waterways. Another may know wheels, yet never develop the institutional system needed to maintain wagon roads. No agreement has been reached on whether practical necessity or technological opportunity usually matters more. The answer is probably different from place to place. That makes the wheel more interesting, not less. An invention becomes historically powerful when it joins a whole network of conditions. Woodworking skill, animals, roads, economic demand, political organization, terrain, repair knowledge, trade. Without that supporting system, the wheel may remain a curiosity. With it, the wheel can transform daily life. You begin to notice how misleading the word invention can be. It sounds finished, invented, done, as though someone creates a wheel and humanity receives a permanent upgrade. But usefulness has to be invented too. A community must discover where the device belongs. Farmers must decide what to haul. Animal handlers must train teams. Roads must develop. Carpenters must learn repairs. Drivers must understand loads and slopes. People must fit the machine into daily routines. That process can take generations, and adoption is never automatic. One community sees a cart and embraces it. Another sees the same cart and thinks about the local mud. A third considers the cost of feeding draft cattle. A fourth points toward the river and gets into a boat. All of them can be rational. One scandalous aside is that modern people sometimes imagine cultures without wheeled vehicles as though they have somehow failed an exam. The assumption says more about modern dependence on wheels than it does about ancient intelligence. You live in a world where wheels are almost invisible because they are everywhere. Cars, buses, trains, aircraft landing gear, factory machinery, office chairs, suitcases, hospital beds, shopping carts. You notice them mainly when one stops working. Ancient societies judge the device from a very different position. They ask whether it solves a real problem. That is exactly what good engineers still ask. Not, can we build it? Should we use it here? The late afternoon light settles over the mountain path again. The mule continues ahead, its pack sway gently. No axle squeaks. No wheel strikes stone. No road crew follows with shovels. The animal simply chooses its footing and climbs. Far below, a river winds through the valley. A boat might carry heavier cargo there. Beyond the mountains, open plains might reward carts. Several transportation worlds can exist within a few days' travel. None is universally superior. You touch the rough wooden rail beside the trail and listen to a distant bell from an animal farther up the slope. The wheel's greatness is not that everyone needs it. Its greatness is that, under the right circumstances, such a simple-looking arrangement changes what movement costs. It does not conquer geography. It cooperates with geography. Where the ground is firm, the route open, the animal strong, and the loads heavy, wooden circles begin turning and entire economies learn to move with them. Where those conditions fail, human beings do what they have always done. They improvise, they carry, they climb, they sail, they adapt. And perhaps that is the quieter invention hidden beneath the famous one. Not the wheel itself, the ability to recognize when a wheel is worth using. The path grows quieter now. The last hoofbeats soften into the evening air, and the mountain shadows stretch across the ground until edges become difficult to distinguish. You no longer need to solve anything. There are no axles to fit, no timber to shape, no roads waiting beneath your feet. Just the slow understanding that human history rarely moves in a straight line. People find answers suited to the places where they live. Sometimes those answers turn in circles. Sometimes they float. Sometimes they walk carefully over stone. You can allow all those distant workshops, roads, rivers, cattle, carts, and quiet trails to fade together now. The wooden wheels stop turning. The tools become still. The dust settles. A cool night gathers over settlements whose names have long disappeared, while the people themselves drift beyond the reach of memory. For now, nothing needs carrying anywhere. Nothing needs inventing. You can simply rest